we see a man named Ian driving to a remote forest somewhere in New Zealand. He parks his car at the entrance and checks his phone, which has numerous missed calls, but Ian doesn't reply to any of those. He simply gathers his stuff and heads inside the forest alone. It appears that Ian's on a solo hike, but his choice of clothing and unusual walking style indicates that he's a rookie. He also gets tired inside the first few minutes, making the challenge even more difficult. Shortly after, Ian arrives at a signpost which reveals that the nearest hut is 9 hours away. It makes him really upset, but he gathers his courage and moves on. Not long after, he takes a short break and discovers a rash on one of his feet, so he pastes a band-aid over his wound and keeps moving. It has barely been an hour into the journey, and he's panting and injured like crazy. A short distance later, he finally spots a couple in the distance. But their presence makes Ian very nervous, and he decides to wait until they're gone. This reveals that he's an introvert who hates interaction with other people. Ian waits for several minutes, but the couple is still busy with their pictures. So, he takes a detour through the bushes and runs away before he's noticed. In the next scene, Ian sits on a comfy spot and decides to have a snack. But the moment he opens a packet of biscuits, a hiker named Nikki appears. Nikki talks a lot and asks several unnecessary questions. Ian, who's already anxious and scared, fails to come up with responses. He simply gets up and prepares to leave, but Nikki somehow convinces him to move together. As the two walk, Nikki keeps on blabbering about irrelevant stuff. It's almost like he's talking to himself, as Ian doesn't have the energy to utter a single word. At one point, Ian says he needs to pee and asks for some privacy, but Nikki simply turns to the other side, as he doesn't want Ian to run away. After several more hours of walking, the duo finally makes it to the cabin. The introvert Ian once again tries to escape, saying he'll proceed to the next cabin. But when Nikki reveals that it is a day's walk away, he reluctantly changes his mind. They then finally enter the cabin, where the earlier couple, Monica and Austin, are already present. Nikki quickly befriends them and engages in conversation. But Ian just wants to rest. Later that night, we see Ian frying some meat in the kitchen. When Nikki shows up, Ian gets so nervous about being waited that he retrieves his meat from the stove, despite it being raw.
Nikki is perplexed by his behavior and tells him to finish his cooking. Ian reluctantly obliges, but then he ends up overcooking the meat, causing a fire too. Breakout. He's now frozen in fear and doesn't know what to do, so Nikki and Monica help putting the fire out. Embarrassed by what he just did, Ian quietly throws his stuff outside and sneaks out of the cabin. But as he reaches a bit further, he notices a mysterious figure in the dark. Terrified, he quickly turns back and returns to the cabin. He then has a short conversation with Austin, who appears to be more sensible and quiet. That night, Ian has trouble sleeping because his mind keeps imagining things. In the morning, Monica notices the stress in Ian's eyes and asks if he slept properly, but Ian simply responds with a yeah. Despite the fire incident from the other night, Nikki doesn't seem angry at all. He happily reveals that all four of them will continue the rest of the hike together. Ian is expectedly against it, as he is scared of interactions, but when Nikki gives him a pair of hiking socks to protect his rashes, he changes his mind. Following this, the group packs their stuff and heads out to explore the woods. Everyone seems to be sharing their stories and experiences, except for Ian, of course. He just wants to reach the next destination and get rid of these weird people. At one point, Monica hands him her phone and asks to click a selfie. Ian is obviously uncomfortable with the idea, but he does it for her sake. Later, the group has a short snack break by the river. The couple talks about how they have not seen any birds in the forest, which is kinda weird. Austin then mentions that he saw a dead animal the earlier day but failed to recognize it. Upon hearing this, Ian is once again left in deep thought. But the group quickly changes the topic and asks about his personal life. Ian hesitantly reveals that he was married once, but now he's single. The others try to ask more questions, but Ian excuses himself and heads inside the woods to take a leak. There, he notices scratch marks on the tree along with blood. This scares Ian shitless, so he quickly returns back to his group. He then informs them about what he saw, but they simply assume it was some animal. Next, the group continues their journey and keeps walking for several hours. Ian, as usual, is anxious. He turns around and sees something in the distance, which makes him assume they are being followed. He then relays this information to the others, but even after a proper look, they don't spot anything. In the next scene, the group reaches another cabin where they decide to rest for the night. They find a backpack, possibly belonging to women, but there's no one around. This once again makes Ian feel uneasy, and several negative thoughts start running through his mind. Shortly after, the group finds a guitar and has a fun time singing and dancing, but Ian just sits by the fireplace.
Later that night, he has trouble sleeping as usual. So he decides to walk around the cabin. Nikki interrupts his weird moment and asks if he's alright. Like a shady drug dealer, he offers Ian some sleeping tablets, which the latter consumes without hesitation. Ian finally expresses his frustration about not being able to sleep, and also claims that he's a loser who is good for nothing. Nikki feels really bad for him, but the best he can do is offer some words of encouragement. After he goes to sleep, Ian continues walking around the cabin, but his eyes soon fall on the abandoned backpacks. Ian finds a camera in one of the bags, which he opens without thinking twice. He then comes across several pictures of two girls hiking through the forest. Everything seems normal, but in one of the pictures, Ian notices a strange man, keeping an eye on the girls from a distance. When he zooms in, he is shocked to learn that the man is none other than Nikki. Ian tries looking for more information, but all of a sudden, the pills he took earlier have started kicking in. Surprisingly, when Ian wakes up the next morning, he finds himself covered in a warm blanket. Monica asks how he ended up on the floor, to which he replies that Nikki gave him some sleeping pills. He then says he wants to show her something. At the same time, Nikki and Austin return to the cabin, and Nikki reveals that he was the one who put that blanket over Ian so he could sleep peacefully. But Ian doesn't trust him, so he pulls out the camera and tells everyone that Nikki was stalking the two girls. Unfortunately, the camera's battery has run out. Despite this, Ian claims that Nikki murdered the two girls. He also says that he was drugged last night, as he was getting very close to finding out the truth. Nikki is furious as he doesn't understand where all these absurd accusations are coming from. But before the matter can escalate, the hiker girls suddenly arrive at the cabin, solving the case once and for all. In the aftermath of this embarrassing incident, Ian packs his bags and sneaks out of the cabin. However, he once again has a change of heart as he knows he did Nikki wrong. He returns to his friend and formally apologizes for the mess he created. To his surprise, Nikki forgives him instantly and acts as if nothing happened. Shortly after, the group of four exit the cabin and continue on their hike. They soon arrive at a crossroad with two paths. One leads to a majestic waterfall while the other goes to the kauri forest. This divides the group as the couple wants to observe the waterfall, while Nikki and Ian want to hike through the forest. In the end, they decide to go their separate ways and meet at the next cabin. Nikki and Ian then continue walking through the dense forest, and at one point, they feel like they've lost their way. They also experience a close call when, at least, I want to help. Oh my god, you were always there. Nikki almost steps into a trap, which Ian claims the locals use to trap goats, but Nikki thinks it's too big. Things only get worse as our anxious hero feels like they're being watched by someone. Later on, his fear quickly turns into joy when they stumble upon the majestic waterfall. The boys celebrate the achievement before continuing on their journey. A few hours later, the sun sets and it gets dark. The duo has to go through a narrow road to make their way to the next cabin, but Ian suggests that they take another path. He fears that someone is waiting for them and that their lives might be in danger. However, Nikki ignores his BS and hands him a torch to lead the way. Ian reluctantly moves forward and tries to slowly navigate through the dark path. But due to his nervousness, he drops the torch down a slope. This makes Nikki furious as he had spent a whopping $300 on the torch. He then orders Ian to go down there and retrieve it, to which the latter reluctantly obliges. Following this, Ian carefully slides down the slope and reaches the place where the torch is at. But just as he's about to depart with it, he notices a strange figure there and makes a run for it while screaming. Monica and Austin happen to be nearby. Nikki also arrives at the scene, and they all start looking for the creature that supposedly chased Ian. However, even this time, they find nothing. When they reach the nearest cabin, Austin, Monica, and Nikki believe that Ian is not mentally fit to continue on this hike, so they must get him out of here. Since the couple is on their honeymoon, Nikki decides to take the fall. The three of them then tell Ian about their plan in the kindest way possible. It's almost as if they are talking to a 9-year-old kid. Ian also realizes that he's becoming a burden to them, so he agrees to their plan. As soon as the sun rises the next morning, Ian and Nikki start their new hike towards the city. A few hours later, Nikki gets the sudden urge to poop, so he excuses himself to a corner. When he doesn't return for a while, Ian starts getting worried. He goes to check, only to come across a shocking sight. The scene then cuts to Monica and Austin, who are casually returning from the cabin, right when they are approached by a terrified Ian, who repeatedly says it killed him and ate him. He also urges them not to proceed forward and instead take another route. However, the couple believes that he has gone mental. When Ian keeps warning them not to go in that direction, Austin points a knife at him, asking him to stay away. Following this, the couple ventures deep into the jungle and arrives at the same spot where Nikki was supposedly killed. But this turns out to be a grave mistake, as Monica is suddenly snatched away by an unseen force. Terrified, Austin rushes to find her, but he once again comes across Ian. Thinking that he's the killer, Austin starts attacking him. But he suddenly stops when he sees his wife's mutilated remains in the distance. Austin begins sobbing uncontrollably. He then tries to attack Ian again, but gets his foot stuck in a trap. And then, at this moment, the killer finally shows up. It turns out to be a massive bird-like creature. The boys are frozen in fear by what they saw and then rush to the cabin and lock all the doors and windows. Now that Austin is gravely injured, it is the coward Ian's job to protect them. He tries grabbing as many weapons as he can to confront the monster. He also assures Austin that they will make it out alive, but the latter doesn't seem too optimistic. Just then, the creature shows up. It hits the door several times before it finally breaks through. Here, we can see how big it is. The first thing the creature does is stab Austin with its pointed beak, killing him instantly. But when it's Ian's turn, he puts up a solid fight. Despite being a total loser, he turns out to be a formidable fighter, as he grabs the monstrous bird by its neck. He also presses his finger on its eye and then chokes it violently with all his might until the bird stops moving. In the next scene, we see a blooded Ian making his way out of the forest. After endless hours of walking, he arrives at the same signpost that we saw at the start of the movie. Ian breaks down in tears as he realizes that his nightmare is finally over. But just then, a few droplets of blood land on his face, and he is shocked to find one of the hiker girls dead. Bodies hung on a tree. Ian also discovers the other same predator in the distance, and a bunch of gigantic eggs laid out on a nest, revealing that the forest is full of these monsters. He runs away from there and almost manages to reach the parking lot, but he's suddenly attacked by one of the monsters. It injures him in several places, but our clever hero manages to escape by taking off his shorts. He desperately runs until he reaches the parking lot, but since he doesn't have the keys, he's unable to get inside his car. And so, he keeps running until he finally arrives at the main highway. Before the film ends, a car soon pulls over by his side, and a blooded Ian says help. Okay guys, thanks for watching. See you again in the next video.